friends, welcome to the Purple Zone, where public policy, practice, and people meet. Because policy isn't abstract, it's personal. So let's talk about it. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It's Alexis, and today I have Jeff Simmons, who is the superintendent of the Idaho Digital Learning Alliance. And I'm so glad he's here because I'm switching over to you, Jeff. Welcome. There are some major things that have happened with IDLA. I've got questions, parents have questions, and I know like people in the education space have questions. Yeah. So we're going to get to it today, and we have a lot of things to cover in like 45 minutes. So I'm going to just like keep us moving forward here. Yeah.
Dive in.
So context and kind of this policy reset. House Bill 940 fundamentally reshapes IDLA, not just as a budget cut, but as a redefinition of purpose. So there was this core shift, and then there was removal of programs, and there was a funding reduction, and there's a new fee structure.
Yes.
So let's go through all those things, because this is like IDLA redefined, and yes. I have to learn because I knew all this stuff, and now I'm like, I don't know this stuff anymore. What the hell happened? So let's talk about what, like, the funding reduction. Let's just start there. Yeah.
So the funding reduction, what House Bill 940 at its core does is it redefines which students and which courses the state funds IDLA to offer. And it reduces what we've historically offered in our 24 years as the state virtual program. So that redesign of who we pay for represented about a $10 million reduction to our program. The follow-up budget bill that came along with it was a $13.5 million reduction to our program, which is 50% of our budget. So at a high level, it cut half of our budget, which in theory means we only serve about half as many kids next year as we served this year.
Yeah. That's like a lot. I mean, sometimes I'm just like, that's what it feels like. I mean, I sat next to you at one point during one of the JFAC. It was actually the very first time I've sat in on JFAC, and those meetings are like, and probably shouldn't say that. But like so much, I mean, you guys just got nailed.
Yes.
That's what I feel like. I mean, IDLA got nailed. Do you feel like that?
Yeah. We felt targeted the whole session. I think I can say that. Mm-hmm. This House Bill 940 was the fifth policy bill that was introduced during the session.
Yeah. So I have here, like in my notes, there was, I'm looking at my notes. I'm doing like 3 shows today, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, what did that mean there? Ultimately, like I see that, virtual schools got cut, but IDLA got a significant, let's talk about that for a second so that we kind of understand the difference here. IDLA got cut 50%, but virtual schools in general, let's differentiate those two.
Yeah. So virtual schools it's like a full-time charter school. So your virtual program is your whole school. Every class you take, all your tests, everything, that's your whole day. IDLA is supplemental, and that's one of the things 940 was trying to reinforce, is that we should only be a supplemental resource, so like one class, fill in gaps, that kind of thing. But we're not a school of our own. So we are like an add-on that every school can use that provides online courses to kids. That's essentially what we do.
Okay. So, and then I forgot to like bring my little thing that like stands up so I can see this because I wanted to. Okay. So I'm trying to be like systematic about this. Let's talk about the things that were removed or restricted.
Yeah.
Because these are big ones.
Yeah, so a lot of things were changed. One is that the grade levels that we can offer changed. So we were K-12, now we're 6-12. So we've up to this year, we've offered a literacy intervention program for elementary students. That's no longer funded. Driver's ed is no longer funded. They also changed the types of students that are funded. So we'll still receive funding if we offer courses to students at an in-person school. If you are at a fully virtual school, such as the virtual charters that you were just talking about, those are not students that we receive funding for. We don't receive funding for private students. Homeschool students could still enroll through their local public school, and we would receive funding to offer courses to those kiddos. But it really redefined who we are and who we're supposed to be. And then at the same time, they also added some intent language about giving us the direction to give priority in our enrollment to kids from rural schools. And so that's something that I'm working with our board on right now to try to figure out how do we reflect that.
Yeah, because I heard you say at one point, and it might have been on Matt's show here at the Ranch podcast, but that 1 in 5 rural students are going to be impacted and 1 in 9 urban students will be impacted.
Yeah.
So there was specific language that said you're going to put rural over urban.
There's some intent language at the beginning of the bill that says IDLA is supposed to be supplemental, and then it goes through, IDLA should be offering dual credit classes and credit recovery and serve small and rural schools. And so it doesn't say exclusively to rural schools, but definitely going through the session, we could hear from our legislators that they wanted us to put an emphasis on being more of a support for our rural schools and for our larger urban schools.
Okay. So, before diving into the very, very specifics that I have questions on that I know are like sitting there in my head, I kind of want to talk about like how we got here.
Yeah.
Like, just kind of the why and the what behind all of these. So you kind of talked about lawmakers framed this as a course correction and returning to IDLA's core mission. And the focus areas, they said they wanted to prevent double dipping. Mm-hmm. They wanted to limit overlap with virtual schools and district offered courses. They wanted to reframe IDLA as not a system-wide provider, but a gap filler. And that they believed that IDLA had expanded beyond its intended role.
Yes.
That's kind of, so what do you think lawmakers got right about the problem? Did you feel like that was a problem?
That's a loaded question. I feel like there were some things that were presented as problems that were perceived as problems.
Okay.
But I think the overall problem is that we don't fund education in general at an adequate level. And so there are gaps that are left behind. And so a program like ours can be greatly useful to a district to help fill those gaps. But the perception from legislators was that was being used so prolifically by some schools that they were taking advantage of the system and using our program instead of the funding that they were being provided to hire their own teachers and offer their own courses. And at a high level, that's a pretty easy argument to make when you've been on a school board. When you get down into the weeds, you realize that you're always looking at trade-offs when you're trying to pay the bills or hire a teacher or add a program. And so it's not as easy as that. And it's complicated because every district has their own needs. At one district, they might need a math teacher. At another district, they need an elective program. So our program was being used as a utility belt to fill in the gaps. But the perception was that was being overused and that there was a need to rein that in a little bit. I won't say that I agree with that because I feel like, districts were acting in good faith within the scope of the law and the rule that was given. But, at a high level, that was the argument. You mentioned the double dipping. That's a narrative we hear a lot that I hope we can now say we've solved this problem. But some lawmakers look at that situation and say we're funding schools to offer courses to kids, and then we're funding IDLA to also offer courses to kids at the same school. So they see that as funding some students twice because the student is being funded as a student at their high school or middle school, and they're being funded as a student at IDLA. And so they see that as extra funding that is putting an extra strain on the budget and on the system. So part of what initiated some of this conversation was a desire to try to correct that.
Okay. So you kind of, you explained some different things. One, during some things that were said in committee that I thought were interesting that I've taken note here. So some of the things that I have written are like Jeff Simmons kind of pushed back on custom sections being framed as misuse. And kind of that these custom sections are often how districts meet requirements and fill staffing gaps, like you mentioned. And the important, and then the tension here of, the legislature creates the requirements like digital literacy and career exploration, and IDLA becomes the tool districts use to meet that. And that rural testimony reinforced IDLA equals access, not convenience. And that really what was kind of pushed back was that IDLA is not extra, it's infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right? What do you like? How do you feel? What do you think about that?
Some of what you appreciate that you were listening to my testimony, taking notes on that. It's good to know somebody's listening to those things. So you mentioned the words custom section. So when we get ready to run courses for a semester, we put out a calendar and we put out a schedule. And so we have, like an early start fall, a late start fall. We have a couple of 9-week sessions for credit recovery, things like that. And anybody can register for any of those courses in that established schedule. We'll get requests from districts. They say, like, I need this specific class and I need it to run on my bell schedule because of XYZ. Teacher shortage, teacher left, I wasn't able to fill a position, my enrollment was greater than I expected, whatever. And so we call that a custom section, and we'll set up a section of a class just for their kids that run on that schedule. And we've had some districts that have done that every year to add to programs or to create opportunities for kids that they don't have locally. It could be anything from a CTE class to an elective to, I think we were the PE and health program for a district for about 3 years before they were able to recruit a teacher. So we'll have districts use this in that manner. That was an instance where legislators were looking at it and saying, well, they're doing that instead of recruiting and hiring a teacher. So we need to crack down on that because we're already funding them to do that. That isn't necessarily the case. Especially with our small districts, you get new requirements. So digital literacy was a new requirement this year. So if you rewind to the last legislative session, the legislature finishes up their work in April. And then as a school district, you now have from April until August to figure out how to offer this class, right? And they're still figuring out the standards. Then you have to hire a teacher, get a curriculum together, all of those things. And hiring a teacher, getting a curriculum director require money and resources, which a lot of our especially our smaller districts don't have. And so with IDLA, we have the ability to put a curriculum together, get that ready to go, and offer that in the fall. And so for a lot of your smaller schools, they're like, okay, IDLA will fill that gap for us this year, so we don't have to focus on that. And if you look at where our growth in our program has been over the last 3 years, it's been on those new state requirements. So personal finance was a new requirement from the state. Last year, driver's ed really blew up for us because the home driver program allowed parents to be the in-car driving instructors as long as they took an online class, and we had one available. That shot our enrollments up. This year it was digital literacy. And so, the criticism about growth in our budget, it goes straight back to growth in the requirements that schools are asked to meet. And so they're using us to meet those requirements the way that we're set up to be. But because that caused growth on the financial side, there was criticism that maybe that needs to be reined in a bit, that we're out of our lane or whatever term you want to use. And so that drove some of the legislation that we saw this year.
So, in understanding all these different things, because this has, an impact on, like you mentioned, public school kids, private school kids, actually, driver's ed, which I am going to ask you a question about that in a moment. And then, K through 5, but that also impacts dual credit or credit recovery, graduation requirements, course access in small districts. One of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking, and this is the world according to Alexis, is that, and I've said this before, when we expand the expectations in education, or when we digital literacy or personal finance, those courses have to be created, and then we have to bring in a teacher for that. And it costs money to turn, when an employee turns over. So for example, if I have an employee and they're kind of an issue, and I can do some professional development with that employee, it's actually probably going to save me money to do professional professional development with that employee and keep that employee there versus dropping the employee and having to go recruit and onboard and do all of these new things with a new employee.
Yep.
So in these new requirements, we have to oftentimes bring in new people, or someone has to get certified, right? Because you have to be certified and all these different things. And what the legislature, one of the things, because there's not just one, but there's more than one. One of the things that really frustrates me about the way that we talk about education in Idaho is that we pat ourselves on the back for being a national leader in education school choice. We just are like, Idaho rocks, which I agree.
We do.
We're great.
I mean, we really are.
We really are.
Yeah.
But I have this analogy that is like dinner time with families. Have you heard me say this on the show? Someone, like, all these people who already listen are going to be like, move on. Here's my dinner analogy. I'll make it quick. We have a family of 6. So I make dinner and I got 4 kids, and dinner costs us $10. We all know that that's not true, but let's say dinner costs us $10. Okay. So dinner's $10, but 2 of my children are super picky. This is true. So 2 of my kids are picky. I do everything I can as a mom to meet those needs, but it's not possible. They refuse to eat, or it, like, let's say they have texture issues, whatever. So now I need to make an additional dinner or add in a couple of extra things so that they will eat dinner with us too. Because, by the way, I also believe in sitting down together as a family for dinner.
Yep.
That is essential. It is really important for our family. It's really important for our communities and society. Okay. So we sit down as a family, but when I do that, I have to increase the cost. The cost increases. I don't want the cost to increase. The cost increases because now I'm expanding options. So instead of the dinner being $10, now dinner's $15 because I've increased choices. Anytime we increase choices, cost goes up.
That's right.
So when it comes to school, then this is how I view, like, the landscape of school choice. When every time we increase options or requirements, we have to pay more for that. And that's the thing that gets me about Idaho. But I do know lawmakers know, because Senator Den Hartog was on the Ranch podcast. And as she was talking about the parent choice tax credit, and Matt brought up, like, we're going to have to pay more, her statement was, yeah, that's okay. Like, as we expand school choice, like, we got to pay for this stuff. And so, but here's the thing. Idaho pats its back. You know, we pat our back like, hey, we're a leader in national school, like, education school choice, but we don't want to fund it. As a matter of fact, as a legislature, we want to squeeze all these areas as possible, squeeze as much as possible. And in some ways, in some of the ways that IDLA, like how this kind of fell out, was that it's not like I look at this and I'm just like, okay, I think it's a good idea to reassess the programs that we have. What's working, what's not, where are things, you know, what are things happening, you know, where could we be a little bit more efficient? What needs to be more effective? You know, all those things. But the way that it was framed was as if IDLA was a problem. That's kind of how I took some of this, that IDLA was a problem, when it was like, well, maybe the problem is that our funding formula in Idaho for education, which was most recently updated in 1994, maybe our funding formula is not modern. It's not out of date, and it does not match our education, school choice leadership in the nation.
Yeah. And even sticking on that school choice argument, also look at where the choices are. The majority of your charter schools and your private schools that offer different types of education, different philosophies, are in your urban areas, because that school has to have a large enough population of kids to operate, right? And so your more rural and geographically distant areas typically just have the public school as the option. So your only other choice in those areas is what you can get through a program like IDLA, right? We can bring in electives, technical programs, things like that you don't have access to. Dual credit, that's a huge one in rural areas. So by restricting IDLA, you're restricting choice. And yeah, maybe our kids in our larger urban areas still have some other opportunities, but definitely in your rural areas, you're now restricting access to choice by choosing to cut our program in half.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And so then like when it comes to, I mean, talk about like actual impacts for families,
Yeah.
because I think about, I mean, I'm a mom. Maybe I got a little selfish while I was listening to IDLA, and I thought, this makes me mad because my three older children have benefited from this program.
Sure.
And the way that they have benefited is course overload. My kids always did course overload, meaning
Okay.
that meaning that they take their, required 7 classes, and my kids always took a religious release, which took an elective section. Okay. So, but I have like a lot of my kids are musicians and they want to be a part of that, but the state has their requirements.
Right.
And so in order to get to some of the things that they really wanted to do, they had to overload their course, right? And I'm explaining this for people who are listening. They would overload. That meant that they would take an additional course through IDLA online. So they're doing their regular stuff during the day and they'll take an additional one in the evening. And then they would also do that during the summer. My kids all took 1 or 2 courses during the summer. And I liked that for kind of like summer slide stuff. I liked it for them having to be responsible. The teachers, IDLA teachers were emailing me, about different things and keeping, contact. So like meaning that in the traditional public school setting, teachers are emailing you about different things. In the IDLA setting, I, as a parent, am receiving emails from my kids' teachers too there. And so, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, well, I don't live in a rural area, and I have a kid who wants to take a class this summer, and my other children had that opportunity, right? And so what does that mean for her? What does that mean for these families that do that?
I mean, the biggest impact of this bill is that we will serve less kids next year. There's just no way around that. We will serve somewhere around 58,000 enrollments this year, which is in the neighborhood of 40,000 students. Our budget was cut in half. So, what's half of 58,000? We're going to try to commit some funds from our reserve. We have a savings account, like a responsible organization. We can commit some funds to help offset that. We're projecting we might get up to 40,000 enrollments next year if we commit out of our fund balance. But if there was demand for almost 60,000 enrollments this year, that means there's about 20,000 enrollments next year that get left off the table. So overall, there will be less access to opportunities for kids. Within the structure of the bill, another change that was kind of forced onto families was the course fees. So in the past, our board would propose course fees that were approved by the State Board of Education every year. Now, those course fees are set in statute and still approved by the State Board of Education. So dual credit is a good example. We have a course fee that we used to waive for dual credit classes. We would just eat that cost and say there's no fee to take a dual credit class. You can use your advanced opportunities dollars to pay for the cost of college tuition. We don't want cost to be a barrier to an opportunity to take a college credit. Now, with the new fee structure, if that course is a graduation requirement, we have to charge up to $40 for that class. If it is not a graduation requirement, we have to charge at least $100 for that class. And so the way your advanced opportunities dollars work, you can use those to pay the college credit, but you can't pay the college credit with your advanced opportunity dollars and the IDLA course cost. So there's going to be out-of-pocket cost for classes now that didn't exist.
Because prior to that, because I never paid a fee once.
Yeah.
And that would have been because the fee would have been waived.
We waived it, yeah.
Okay. And because that fee now is in statute, that would have to be,
That's correct.
that means that in order for that to change, the law would have to change.
Correct.
Yeah.
And for the fees to be increased or decreased or removed would require another act of the legislature to address that.
So this means then, like, let's go to our rural space. That means kids in a rural school who don't have access to a dual credit class, but they want it. Like we have a kid who's going from Riggins to an Ivy League school, and it was because he had access to IDLA and could take some advanced classes. If another student in Riggins wanted to take a dual credit class, the advanced opportunities funds are going to pay for that credit that class,
Right.
but mom and dad still have to
Yeah.
pay the fee. And so that's a $40 fee for required classes, a $100 fee for elective classes.
Correct. So you might look at something like, an English 101 would transcript as your senior English. So we could bill you $40 for that one. If you were looking at, say, something career related like intro to health professions or medical terminology, that's one that helps you prepare for a nursing certificate. Those would be $100 credits because they, on the high school side, don't translate to classes that are required for graduation.
Okay, so I'm sitting here going like, okay, yeah, my daughter like wants to go into the nursing program, so I'm going to just be planning to pay that money. Now, one of the things that was interesting, because like talking about, the rising costs and how it is more expensive to live right now. Gas is like $4.20 or $4.40, depending on where you go. Like that was a massive increase, like super fast.
Yeah, right.
And, the cost of groceries are up. And it was interesting because I have 2 kids in college right now. And, like we're still on, joint co-owners of bank accounts and stuff. So I can see. And I was like looking at one of my kids' kind of like bank statements. And I thought, that's like really high. Why is that so high this month? Because like this kid is very structured in his spending and, all those things. But he is very specific about food. Like he wants to make sure that he has good, healthy choices, right? And that he makes things from scratch and all that kind of stuff. And I realized that increase was from groceries.
Yeah.
That he has to pay that much more. And he has to pay that much more to get to the grocery store because of gas. And I thought, for certain groups of people, like in certain socioeconomic groups, this is a decision of, sorry, kid, you're not going to be able to take that class because we cannot afford it, because we need to be able to buy food and get to our jobs. And that sounds bleak or serious, and like, because it is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like that's.
No, it is. It's disappointing. I know. And for some families, you might be like, oh, it's $40. It's $40. But for some families, this is $40.
That's a lot.
It really, not everybody has the same means. And, but we believe that kids should all have the same opportunities. And so what that means is we have to prevent things like finances from becoming a barrier to equitable opportunities. And I think we've taken a step backward on that with this for sure.
Well, and to your point of, school choice, right? And we're offering school choice means, even kids having choices to explore the things that they're interested in.
Yeah.
Here now in as I was listening to you, my brain went, okay, well, the state and schools have specific requirements for kids to graduate. And it is important for kids to have some of these foundational things as they go off into the world. We want to make sure that, you understand the United States, you understand Idaho, that kind of stuff, even though I don't think we cover Idaho enough in some of our government or classes. They cover it in 4th grade. It's a really long time from when they graduate.
Yes.
But these kids, we're always talking, we've changed our language in terms of, like when I was growing up, it was college, go to college. Mm-hmm. And now it's college and career ready.
Yeah.
And to be career ready, that's at any moment. Even kids that go to college, we need them to be career ready. So career ready really captures every student. And that in Idaho, we want our kids to be able to explore and have experiences and do all these different things. And with this comes the limitation of not being able to have that exploratory opportunities in high school, which, mind you, is the safest place for kids to have that exploratory experience, because they have the net of mom and dad and being at home when they fail, when they figure out they don't like it, all the things. We're kind of tearing at that, it seems.
Yeah. And I think we could even expand what career ready means. Like, obviously there's lots of technical programs that are wonderful where you can graduate with a technical certificate, go straight into the field or start stacking credentials, whether that's working in HVAC or medical or wherever you want to go. With IDLA, we can provide some access to that a district can build upon, but you can at least get some of that experience as a kid to say, like, is this really what I want to do? which is a way cheaper way to get that experience.
Mm-hmm.
In a district, if you're in a Boise, you might have access to all of those programs. But if you're in a smaller district, you have access to whatever the school is able to support, which may or may not fit your needs. What about military? Is military a career? I think so. And there's lots of opportunities in the military for kids. So, we've really expanded what it means to be career ready as far as what those careers are. But that also means then that as a child, you have to be able to pursue any of those, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know of a school outside of maybe our largest districts that can meet all of those career paths for kids. And so again, where's the equity for the kids, right? The equity is they have limited access to whatever their local resources can provide. And to me, that's not equity.
Right. Yeah. So tell me about driver's ed, because I want to know what this is going to mean for, let's get specific here.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, we don't do any driving online. It's just the classroom portion. You still have to drive an actual car. So we'll just stop with that. But where that started was, we traditionally have offered the classroom portion of driver's ed, and then students would either have to work with a private driving instructor or with the instructor at their local school to do the driving piece. There was a law put in place. It's called the Parent-Student On-Road program, I believe. It allows the parent to be that in-car driving instructor. God bless them. I didn't want to be that for my son. We barely both lived through that experience. But especially, again, in your rural areas, that may be who can help you with this, right? And it's a life skill. I get it. It's important. You need to know how to drive. It gives you access to a job. It's important. So what they said was if you take an IDLA class or another state-approved driver's education curriculum, you can do the parent piece and get your driver's license. That's a great solution. And we offered...
Because driver's ed is required to get a driver's license in Idaho.
Right.
That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we offered a low-cost class that kids could take, and I don't think mom and dad are going to charge it to do the driving piece. So it was a real good opportunity for kids, and our enrollment blew up in that this year. But that is no longer
meaning that so many people.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we had. I think we had probably 3,000 or 4,000 kids take that class this year.
Because how much was the class?
Well, our course fees this year were $40. So
yeah, and I will tell you that in order for my kid to go and my kids to learn to do driver's ed, I think I paid $400.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a curriculum that's been developed by Idaho educators, just to Idaho standards, taught by Idaho teachers, right? You have other online options that are not publicly funded. They're private, but they're options. The prices are going to vary. Well, now that's no longer funded at IDLA. So that's not a program that we can offer. If we did, we'd have to offer it at cost, which would be... It would be too expensive, I believe, for families to take that, and for us to create enough students to make it a good course for us to offer in a responsible way with our financial resources. And I mean, because our enrollment has been cut, we have to take a step back and look at, if we can only offer half as many classes as we did last year, what's the most important thing? Driving's important. So is graduating high school. And so which of those two, so we're going to have to err on the side of let's make sure kids at least have a diploma. Yeah. And so, however many thousand students we had taking driver's ed this year, that number will have to find a different solution for next year, because that's no longer funded through the state of Idaho. And so I think it will make it very difficult for parents wanting to use that program to find a good solution. I hope some other folks step up and fill that gap. I really do. I want to make sure that families can still use that program. But we are releasing a lot of capacity there that others are going to have to pick up.
Well, because you have to. You're being forced to.
It was not our choice.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting, and it reminds me of something someone else said about IDLA in general, was that these are Idaho curriculums. They're curriculums developed by Idaho educators in Idaho. These are Idaho homegrown. And when I hear frustration from some lawmakers, I mean, I'm going to be on Matt Todd's show here in just like like a half an hour talking about the legislative takeaway, takeaways from the legislative session. And one of my takeaways is that these things that we said were problems in Idaho are not actually problems in Idaho. They are a national narrative that have made their way all the way down here. And I say that because there's a lot of what's happening nationally has impacted what's going on in Idaho, but also a lot of national things have they've made their way into Idaho in a way that's like, okay, but what I've heard from lawmakers, like, for example, the WWAMI program, medical over in Washington, a lot of lawmakers were like, well, we don't like that because over in Washington, they do it this way and we want to do it our way.
Right.
But then it's like, but then they flip the coin and say, but we don't want to support the Idaho way with IDLA and some of these options. Again, that's Alexis Morgan making those statements, but I feel pretty confident in making them. Like those are, I feel confident in that assessment.
Sure. I mean, one of the common discussions with virtual schools is build or buy. Do you build your own curriculum or do you buy it? We've always chosen to build. And so when you take an IDLA class, you're taking a class that an educator in Idaho developed just to Idaho standards. So we're not looking at California standards, Florida standards. I don't care what they teach there. We're just looking at what we teach in Idaho. And then we have an Idaho certified teacher who lives in Idaho teaching that class. So it's all people who share our values, live in the same communities, building and offering these courses to kids. You will not find that in any other provider. You will find, you have virtual charter schools that have Idaho educators that live in the community, but they're likely not developing their own curriculum, or, they're bringing it in from a publisher or a large corporation that lives out of state. And what they do is build something that's broad enough that they can squeeze it into every state, but it's never tailored specifically for Idaho and Idaho kids. So if you want that, IDLA is your solution for that.
Agreed. Thank you so much for clarifying all of those things. Now, let's talk about this from a leadership angle, because here you are, the superintendent. You've got this big, 50% cut. How do you navigate through this as the leader in this space?
It's been tough. We're actually working with our board on some of these decisions right now. And we've got a big meeting next week where we're going to come to consensus on some things, and that'll kind of set the path forward for the next school year. We know for sure that we're no longer offering elementary classes. So that's 27 team members that we're letting go at the end of the semester. And so, our focus with that team has been to try to help them find a good place to land and love on them until, we get through the end of the year. We are focused on making sure that we still provide quality for kids with what we do. And that means having good, caring staff available to provide support and build curriculum and provide technology support and all the things that we talked about. So we still need key core staff, but we have to learn to live within a new budget. So there's going to be some hard decisions. We were making some yesterday. You can't continue to do everything that you've done under a budget that's been reduced this drastically. So there will be some things that we have to let go. Nobody wants to be the school or the student that loses on this thing. But with a 50% cut to our budget, I don't know that we can protect any school, really. I mean, it's that big of a blow to the organization. So everybody will feel it in some way. Our commitment is to doing the best that we can with what we have.
So you talk about the human side. What was there a moment that felt particularly hard?
Yeah. The elementary piece has been the hardest for me. So, we knew that was something that was on the table clear back in January. And when I say we had to cut 27 staff, you're thinking about a number. I know their faces. I know their families. I know if they're the sole earner in their household. I know that that's food on the table. That's been really hard to carry that, because these are people that you know and love and care for. And what's hard, I think, as an administrator during the legislative session is that there's so much that's outside of your control. So you can advocate, we took a lot of data down to the Capitol this year and said, here's the specific impact of this decision on kids in your legislative district. Like, we really tried hard to put names to the numbers and paint the impact. But at the end of the day, it's not my decision to make, and so I have to then live with and implement what I'm given. And that's really hard because you want to take care of your people. That's the number one thing you want to do. And it felt like for 3 or 4 months of my life that I had to just kind of ride the roller coaster on that, and that's been really difficult.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I mean, because as a parent, but then also just kind of a civic leader over here, watching it unfold. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, I walked into JFAC, the very first time I'd ever been in before. I sat next to you, and I just remember feeling like just observing the heaviness that I felt like you were experiencing in real time as you were listening to JFAC kind of debate over what they were going to send to the House, to the House and the Senate.
I think I didn't even notice that you sat next to me at first. I think I was just like staring forward with this blank, but it meant a lot to have, and it's meant a lot with you and others to just come alongside and be like, hey, like, we get it. We're sorry. We're here for you. Like, that's meant a ton. And we've received a lot of that type of support, which we appreciate. It doesn't make the situation any better, but it's at least good to know that you're still part of a community that cares and is here to support you. So, I appreciated that. I didn't know that was your first JFAC experience.
It was my very first.
Wow.
It was kind of funny because I have started to really enjoy like going into the committee, meetings. I happened to actually walk into one committee meeting just randomly, and it was a medical bill, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been seeing this on the news, and here I just happened, to walk into it. So, and the committee hearings, they often remind me of being on the school board and listening to the public comment section, which was my favorite. I always loved like hearing from the community.
Sure.
But for some reason, I heard at some point that they were like, well, you can't testify in JFAC. And then my brain went to, okay, well, you can't sit in and listen. So I just assumed you couldn't. And so when I think I was looking for you in the Capitol, and I asked someone, I was like, hey, where did Jeff go? And they were like, he went to the JFAC meeting. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was a dumb assumption that I made. And so then walking over there was funny. I kind of like looked in, and there was it's a police officer. There was a police officer there. And I was like, hey, can I go in there? And he was like, yeah. So even I don't know all this stuff down there. And so it was interesting just for me,
Well, for those of you who haven't been to the Capitol, the JFAC room is pretty imposing. So, the committee rooms, they're imposing enough on their own just because the people who are in there. But the room where JFAC meets is the original Idaho Supreme Court chamber. And so you walk in, there's this huge domed ceiling. I call them pews that you have to sit in. That's basically what they are. And then there is a place where folks can present to the group. I don't get to present anymore. I used to. The new rules are that the agencies don't present, but we can answer questions if you're invited. We weren't invited, so we didn't have a hearing this year. But you have that space, and then everything else is roped off. And then up above you on this long bench is the chairman, and then the rest of them are on the sides. It's a very imposing space. But outside of the session, it's actually a pretty cool room. It's to walk into. But it's it's a different feel in that room for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I felt what you described 1,000%. So, one of the things that I, in my PhD program that we talk about in public administration is efficiency versus like being effectiveness, right? And that sometimes those are not the same thing.
That's right.
Right. And that, really kind of having to stand in the tension of those. What do you hope looking forward? What do you hope to see in terms of efficiency versus effectiveness with IDLA and with some of these options for our Idaho kids, specifically our rural kids, which are 70% of our districts in Idaho are rural.
Within IDLA, we're doing some strategic planning right now, and we'll have some efficiency goals around the use of AI. And it's more to empower the work that our people are already doing. It's not to replace people, but how can we help people become more efficient at what they do? I would never advocate to replace a teacher with AI.
Which they can't actually, because that's actually in the AI framework bill. I think they wrote that in there
I
specifically.
believe so. And I'm glad that that's there.
Yeah.
But even so, we can give teachers AI tools that maximize their time with kids. So instead of digging through data, I can have that presented to me and then spend more time working with a student and trying to figure out what they need. So those are definitely things that we'll look at internally. Externally, what I hope is we will work on ways to bring our costs down, because even if you're one of those students that we're not funded for next year, you can still take a class. You just have to pay our cost for it, which is $445, which is a lot for one class. So, we're trying to find ways that we can bring that down, but we won't sacrifice quality to do it. But that's one thing that we will commit to. I hope that with our stakeholders and our legislative partners, we can look at what needs were not met next year and how can we find an efficient way to still meet those needs using IDLA and other partners so that we're not trading cost for opportunity to kids. I think that's the biggest challenge that we have next year, is that we decided that the cost was more important and we're going to leave some kids behind. And I think that we can find some ways to fix that, but do it efficiently and meet in the middle.
I so appreciate this conversation. And I think sometimes I feel like the heaviness of this moment.
Yeah.
It feels heavy because, to your point, it just seems like cost was put over kids.
Yeah.
In a way that I just don't feel like our Idaho kids deserve.
I agree.
And I remember it was a year ago, and at the time I was a state PTA president, and I was there advocating for some specific. It was a bill for Senator Kevin Cook about technology and kids.
Yeah.
And I had heard a story from a former state PTA president, actually Senator Julie Van Orden.
Okay.
So if you look over there, her picture is over there, actually from the late 90s, early 2000s. And she and some of her friends told me about how Idaho PTA helped pass legislation regarding cigarette cartons and the location of those in mini marts and grocery stores, because they used to be like on the counter.
Yeah.
And with the help of Idaho PTA and a lot of their groundwork, they put that all got locked behind people. So that's why it's locked now in Idaho. You can't just like grab it off the counter. And when they did that, when the legislature passed that bill and the governor signed, the takeaway was Idaho put kids first. They didn't let big tobacco descend upon them and take that, override what was important.
Yeah.
And last year, when we were working on that legislation, I told people too many lawmakers picked big tech over our Idaho kids because we didn't get that passed.
Yeah.
And so now I'm looking at this and I'm going, I think too many lawmakers picked a large national narrative and picked some outside agendas and pick some things that are sound bites for what sounds good on a flyer for their campaign. They picked that over our Idaho kids.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for people like you and people in our education space and in our school communities and people in the business space. I mean, there's people in a lot of places in Idaho who are 1,000% behind kids and want to help create opportunities for them to be able to go where they want, but also for them to feel supported in that process.
Yeah, and that's what brings me hope too, is, I mean, we did have some really solid legislators working with us who get it and who are fighting for the right things. There's good people in the system.
Yep.
There's some great teachers in the system. There's some good administrators, good stakeholders like yourself. And so I believe that, if we continue to speak up and say, this is what we need for our kids and our Idaho kids, that we can turn the tide back to where it needs to be. So I guess what I would encourage is, if you're listening and you feel this way, like, make sure somebody knows about that. You can share it on social media for free. You can, your legislator contact information is free to find and easy to use. And there are so many ways that you can get that word out there to try to let our decision makers know what is important to us as Idahoans.
Amen, brother. I love that. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your team and what you're doing. The Morgan family has been deeply impacted in a positive way by IDLA. So we're here to support and raise our voice as well. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Purple Zone. Thanks for being here. If you liked what you heard, leave a review on your fave podcast app or on YouTube. And from me to you, the heart of The Purple Zone says community is where policy comes to life.